Good morning, y'all. Welcome to another video on Ludico Arms channel. Today we are going to put a new radiator in the Cherokee. This is my 1998 XJ. Got the inline 6 in it. And right now I got it draining. I just got done flushing it. There's no, I've flushed this system a bunch of times. There's no sediment, no rust, nothing left in it. I've used ThermoCure in it. If you've seen, I got a previous video on that. Cleaned all the rust out of the engine. So all that's good to go. And now we are draining the radiator, and then we'll start pulling it out. So we're going to replace it with this radiator here. I bought it off of Amazon. It's Alloy Works makes it, and it's a 3-core radiator. So if you look at it, you can see that it's thick. It fills up the whole space that the radiator would normally sit in. And if we look at a factory radiator, which I've got an old one sitting out here, you'll see the top bracket's the same, but the core, if you look at the tank down there, you can see that the core, it's a single core. So does not hold as much antifreeze, nor does it have as much surface area for heat exchange. Now, I know if you go to any of the Reddit groups or the Facebook groups for XJs, you're going to have hundreds of people saying that don't buy one of these radiators, all you need is a factory cooling system. And for the most part, I am one of those people. I agree. In most cases, all you need is the factory cooling system working correctly. But let me tell you the reasoning behind why I am going to try this radiator. So when I bought this XJ, I bought it from the upstate and I drove it home. It's about a two-hour drive or so. And it kept, the gauge kept pegging out, the temperature gauge. Now it wasn't actually overheating, it was, it had an air bubble in it. But it was definitely getting hot. And so, right after I got it home, before I started daily driving it, I basically replaced the entire cooling system. New water pump, new thermostat, new fan clutch, new radiator, new thermostat housing, all new hoses. Basically everything in the cooling system was replaced, and all with name brand, high quality parts, if not factory parts, depending on what I could get. And as it stands now, anytime the temperature is below 85 to 90 degrees, cooling system works great. 210 degrees, never any different, works great. So I know that the cooling system is working. Also, at the same time that I replaced all that stuff, I did a bunch of other testing, which we'll get to. So that being said, when the temperature is above, anything above 90 for sure, and between 85 and 90, it's one or the other, what'll happen is you'll run on 210 for the most part, but then when you get out on the highway, and around here, you know, everything's a hill. I'm sitting on top of a hill right now. And you get out on the interstate and start pulling a good grade uphill, and the temperature starts rising. Now it gets up to about 220, And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, that's normal for an XJ. It might be normal for an XJ, but my reasoning is why? Why am I settling for a normal that's not? This thing shouldn't be running that hot. So, did some research. When the XJs were originally conceived, and if you don't know this beautiful vehicle was designed by Renault, not by Jeep. At the time, Renault and AMC Jeep were partners. So Renault designed this thing, not Jeep. And the original year model, the engines that were available were two. You had a 4-cylinder and you had a little French V6. And so, like everything, the system was designed around what they were going to use, which was a 4-cylinder and this little V6. Well, the little V6, French V6, turned out to be crap, not surprisingly. And so AMC looked around and said, well, we got this old 6-cylinder that we've had since the design of since the 50s, and it'll be a shoehorn, but we can fit it in there. And they did some testing and they said, well, the cooling system is barely adequate, but it's adequate, so we'll go with it. Because the only way to make the radiator bigger on this vehicle would be to make it taller, and the only way to make it taller would be to redesign the whole front end of the vehicle, which they were not willing to do. And who can blame them, because it looks good the way it is. So they said, well, barely adequate is still adequate, so we'll go with that. Now you'll have other people tell you, well, you know, it's a factory design, and yeah, it is. And in most cases, I would completely agree with them. And even in this case, for the most part, I agree. If you live somewhere with more temperate climates, the factory system is probably all you need. But I live in the deep south. And in the deep south, we don't get 1 week of 100+ degrees. We get a summer of 100+ degrees every summer. So it's a barely adequate system, and then you add 488 gears, lockers, bigger tires, fixing to go up to even bigger tires, and you know, barely adequate all of a sudden becomes, well, not always adequate. So as an experiment, I went ahead and bought this radiator, and we're going to try it out. Now we're going to keep the factory cooling fans, that mechanical fan and that auxiliary electric fan for the air conditioning. All that's going to remain the same. All we're doing is replacing the radiator. So we're just going from a 1-core radiator to a 3-core. And some people say that, you know, you'll reduce the airflow, and you might some, but looking at this radiator and looking at the factory radiator that's in here, I don't think that's going to be that much of a difference. I think it's all going to even out. My only goal is to keep this thing on 210 during the 3 months of you know, Satan summer that we get down here in the south. You know, it's the other thing you got to remember when you go and ask a question on the internet, especially about a cooling system. You know, a lot of people will tell you the factory is adequate, and again, I agree with that. I am definitely not. If you have a cooling system problem, if your vehicle is overheating all the time, you don't need to run out and get this radiator. You need to figure out what's going on with the system. Why is it overheating all the time? But in this case, that's not what we have. We have a system that works perfectly 3/4 of the year, warms up to 210 degrees and stays there. And then 3 months out of the year when it's hot, it starts rising up to about 220, 225. And the problem is, once it gets there, it can never get back down to 210. It'll go lower. It will cool off from the highest, but it never gets back down to 210. And that, to me, indicates a capacity problem, a cooling capacity problem, which, like I said, if you look at the history of this and how it was designed, is no surprise, because the cooling system on this vehicle was never designed for the old AMC inline 6-cylinder. It was designed for a 4-cylinder and a small Renault V6. So the Renault V6 lasted, I think, 1 or 2 years, and they were like, this is junk. They got rid of it. They put the 6-cylinder in there, but they never changed the cooling system because they didn't want to change up the front of the truck. So we're going to try this, and if, like I said, this thing was only, it was less than $200. If it's junk and I have to swap it back out for the factory radiator, then I have to. It's not really that hard to do, and I'm willing to experiment with it and try it to reduce those temperatures. Now, I know that that's probably not going to hurt this vehicle, but I want it to be 210 degrees like it's supposed to. I don't want to look down there and see the gauge on 225 every day during the summer. So this is what we're going to do. So I've got the radiator draining in that bucket right there. It's just about done now. And then we'll have to, you got to pull this electric fan, you got to pull that fan shroud off and set it back. You got to pull all the bolts out of this cross member, pull it off. You got to take your radiator hoses loose and your transmission lines loose. So let me get all the stuff over here for that, and we'll start doing that. So I'll be right back. Guess I should have made a list of what I wanted to talk about before I started talking. So before we start pulling that, one other thing too is, you know, there's a lot of guys that off-road these out in New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and man, I love y'all's videos, and y'all have some awesome terrain to run in. And yes, it also gets to 100 degrees there, and you use a factory cooling system and everything's fine. But what you don't have there is 90 to 100% humidity like we have here. And humidity reduces the efficiency of heat transfer. That's the reason why y'all can use a swamp cooler to cool off your shop, and it doesn't work here, because humid air does not transfer that heat as efficiently as dry air. Same goes for an air to water cooler like a radiator. The humid air does not transfer that heat as efficiently as dry air does. So like I said, we're going to try this out. You know, the reviews online, some people swear by them, and then you get other people who say they're terrible and they would never put it in there, but then you don't know if they actually ever tried one. And you know, the internet's famous for leading people astray. So we're going to try it. Like I said, it doesn't take long to change out, and the worst thing that can happen is we get to change it out again, which is no big deal to me. So let me grab the tools and I'll be right back. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is cut these zip ties off that I've got. Yours may not have these. I've just got them on here for this wiring that's run across the top here. Cut them off and replace them when we go back together. That's got that loose. Then I need to take these clamps loose that are holding this hose on. They're 8mm. They also hold on these fan shrouds. But right now I'm more concerned with getting this hose loose. Now that's loose. Take this little clamp off. Pull that hose off. Because what I'm going to do is pull that overflow tank there and flush it out too. Since we're putting a new radiator in and we flushed the engine, we're going to flush that too, get all any crud that's in it out. So before you do all that, you'll want to drain the radiator, which you can see I've done here. And the drain is up in there on the bottom corner of the radiator. I have my vacuum ball mounted right here, so I have to take it loose to get to it. It's kind of hard to show, so I'll show you on this radiator here. So that's the drain right here, and it's just, you just unscrew it, screw it. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this tank out. There's two little screws on it we got to pull out. I'm not sure if they are 8 or 10. Looks like 8. Gonna need an extension. So it's just two little sheet metal screws on there, and then we can supposedly wiggle this on up out of here. So the rear end of it kind of sits up under that fuse box, so you got to be careful to get it out. So we got that out. Now I'm going to clean that out and set it to the side, and I'll be right back with continuing on with pulling the radiator. Alright, I got that overflow tank cleaned out. So now when we pulled that hose off, the two clamps on mine also hold on this shroud. So all you got to do is kind of pick it up and slip it off of the tabs there, and you can just leave it sit right there on the fan like that, and it'll be fine. So now we got this electric fan we got to pull. It's kind of the same deal. It's got two 8mm headed screws on the top of it. And you can pull it right off. And it's also got an electric plug that you've got to pull. Now it's the same way at the bottom, it just fits into two tabs, so if you pick up on it, you'll be able to move it around. I got to disconnect this electrical here. Knew I did it before. Just had to get everything in the right spot. Alright, so there, we got our electric fan off. And we got this back out of the way. And so getting that out of the way then gives you room so that you can get down to the transmission lines and the hose there. So now we've got to pull the radiator hoses, upper and lower, and the transmission lines, and then we can take this cross member piece here off, and we should be able to lift the radiator right up out of there pretty much. So get here, probably 15/16. Totally blocking. So we'll loosen that clamp up, and that should, yep. Alright, so we loosen that clamp up, pull that hose off, we'll come over here. So this one we got to pull the radiator cover off first. So alright, let's swap up tools. So on this top we're going to need a 10mm. And a Torx bit. Looks like a T30. So there's a row of Torx screws right here on this grill piece, and they're kind of a pain in the behind because you can't totally get straight into them. Got to pull those out. Got those out. Now we've got to pull these 10mm. Now there's two here and one here, so we'll go on and pull them. And then on the other side, you got two there, and there should be one there, but apparently mine's missing. Did not realize that. But we'll go on and pull those two off. And with those out, this piece should be loose. So we'll usually got to wiggle it around a little bit to get it out. Yeah. I got to take that off. So you may or may not have to remove this piece, but in an effort to make this thing cool better, I had made this piece to go in there and hold the radiator as close to the fan as I could get it, because there was some play in it. And so now I got to pull that off of there. Obviously, you're probably not going to have this little piece of plastic in here, and I probably won't after this. Okay, now we should be able to remove this piece. Do y'all see that? See the rust in there? That is a 10mm socket that has been hiding right there. I'll be damned. At least I know what happened to it now. Sometimes you do get your 10mm back. Of course, by the end of this video, I'll probably lose one or the other, or both, of them. Good thing I got a box of spare. So you just want to kind of jiggle this out of here and be careful not to damage anything. Set it aside. Alright, so now that that's out of there, if you have air conditioning, like I do, you see this, then you got to pull these brackets off, because you're going to be putting that onto the new one when you put the new one in. So let's get that done. And they look like they're about 8mm maybe. So we'll pull that off. It's got this kind of bailed out washer that holds it all together. Go over here to the other side and get it off. And now that we have that cross member off, we can get to our clamp for this top radiator hose and get it off. And we just set it back to the side like that. We'll take our wire here and lay it forward so it's out of the way. Now we've got to get those two transmission lines broke loose. So let me get the wrenches for that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I noticed something when I was getting the tool to take the transmission lines off. The little brackets that hold the air conditioning condenser onto the front of the radiator. On this radiator here, it's got a stud for it. So that's why I took that nut and washer off. But the new radiator has the brackets for it already welded on. So it's got to fit over the stud right here on the condenser. So I had to take those brackets off, take these two brackets off, and they're held on with these sheet metal crap things. So once I get this radiator out of there, I may try to see what the thread pitch, I might have to clean those up and see what I can do with them, because I don't know if I trust putting those sheet metal things back on there. They're pretty rusty. So now we've got the two transmission lines to take out, and down there in the center there's a clamp holding my transmission line that is sheet metal screwed into that bracket in the center of the radiator. So we need to get under there and pull that out, which I'll do real quick because I don't think that's factory. I think the PO previous owner put that there. When I replaced the transmission lines, I just put it back in there because it's in a good spot. But so we'll get that off, and then we'll get these two transmission lines here off. So we'll go ahead and do that first. Now on mine, both of the fittings are 3/4. So now that we've got that electric fan and stuff out of the way, we can take our 3/4 wrench and get right in here to them. And hopefully just break them on loose, easy peasy. And of course, that one is not going to be on the do-right program. So I got to get a wrench behind that because it's trying to take the adapter fitting out of the radiator. Alright. We'll try the bottom one. All right. They don't leave a lot of room to get your fingers down in here. Alright, so the bottom one's off. And you'll get some transmission fluid dripping out on the ground. I'm not that worried about that right now. So let me, that's a smaller size on the back. Look. Right there. This is what I got to get loose. And there's an adapter fitting screwed into that radiator, and it's turning that instead of coming loose. And that's a problem because we don't want to twist off the end of that transmission line. So what I'm going to do is see about making a, I got to grind a wrench. I don't have a wrench that'll fit in that slot right there. They're all too wide. So let me see what I can find and I'll be right back. Okay, I got it now. So I had to go dig through my old wrenches and find an old Craftsman 5/8 there, and it was just skinny enough to get on that behind there. So now we can get that off. All right, so that's off, and we should be able to pull this on up out of here. Oh, I got to get that clamp down there real quick. All right, I'm gonna get that clamp loose, and I'll bring you back when I pull this out of here. Okay, we got that little clamp off, so now we should be able to just lift this up out of here. In theory. Now, because we may at some point in the future want to reuse this radiator, we're going to be very careful not to ding it up. It's got two pins in the bottom of it. So if you see down here and over there, there's a pin, there's two pins in the bottom of the right there. There's two pins in the bottom that fit into those two holes, and that's what locates the bottom of the radiator. They go right here through this bracket on the condenser, and then right here on the other side. And there's supposed to be a rubber grommet in there, but it appears to be missing on here. Right here. All right, so here's our radiator, and you can see how the core and the tank, oh, dang it, see how the core and the tank are not the same size. So there's room for improvement. And if we look over here on this new one, the core goes all the way out to the tank. So that should, in theory, provide better cooling. We shall see. We shall see. So I'm going to get this cleaned up over here, see if I can find a rubber grommet to go back on the bottom of that for the one that's missing, And then also I've got to swap these fittings over to the new radiator so that my transmission lines will bolt up. So let me see about cleaning this up, and I'll bring you back when we get ready to put this all back together. Okay, so we're about ready to drop this thing back in there. And when you're going back in, you got the 2 pins on the bottom that have got to go in their holes, and then you've also got that tab and that tab that have to go over the 2 studs on the condenser, and you've got to get it in there and not damage it. So I'm going to set this camera here, and hopefully y'all be able to see everything while I wrestle this in there, try to get everything in its place. So I'll show you the problem we're having. See these little studs on top of the condenser? They got to go through these tabs, but the holes in these tabs are not elongated enough. I need to bring both sides in a little bit so that it'll sit down on there. So let me get a file and take care of those holes real quick. So that's the first problem with the old larger radiator, but we'll get it taken care of. So let me get that taken care of, and then we'll come back. Let me go grab a little round file and elongate those, and we'll be ready to go. All right, I elongated these 2 holes. I can see these studs on this are a little bent, but I don't want to straighten them because I don't want to take a chance on breaking that AC condenser. So we've adjusted these. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a flaw with the radiator so much as just a unfortunate result of my stuff being bent there. There's that. There we go. All right. So we are in like Flynn. Plenty of fan clearance, it looks like. So now I will I gotta swap the battery in the camera real quick. Then we'll get these nuts and washers put back on the condenser. We'll start getting all of the lines hooked back up and get this job finished up. So I'll be right back. All right, so we are in like Flynn. Plenty of fan clearance, it looks like. So now I will I gotta swap the battery in the camera real quick. Then we'll get these nuts and washers put back on the condenser. We'll start getting all of the lines hooked back up and get this job finished up. So I'll be right back. Okay, now that we've got the radiator sitting in there, we're going to go ahead and put our transmission lines back on. So you got your bottom one down here and then your top one, and then we'll put this hose on. And we'll put this hose over here on. Make sure you remove these caps off of your new radiator so that you get flow through it. So let me get those put on real quick. Alright, I'm not going to kill the battery filming me wrestling with this. So I'm going to get that bottom on, the top on, get the hose on. I'll bring you back after that because it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so I got that bottom one on. What I finally had to do was take this tool and pop that quick disconnect fitting off and put the fitting on. Screw the fitting into the radiator and then put the line back on it. So now we'll continue on. We've got this radiator hose back on. We'll tighten the clamp up on it, and then we'll get this top one on. All of our lines are hooked back up. I got to run underneath there and put that clamp back on that transmission line, and then we'll come back and start putting the cross member back in. Oh, also I put the nuts back on the condenser studs. So let me get that clamp put on real quick, and then I'll bring you back when we go to put the cross member back on. Alright, on this radiator, when you look at it on Amazon, the one complaint that everybody has about it is that it doesn't, the cap is the neck is shorter. That's what I'm trying to say. Where it comes out of the radiator and the cap hits the cross member, and you've got to modify the cross member. So you can see I've got some lines drawn here, and I'm going to pull this off and go ahead and modify it and smooth it all out, and then we'll come back and put it in here. So I can confirm that if you get one of these radiators from Alloy Works, that you will have to modify your radiator cross member, which is absolutely not a big deal at all to me, because I mean my fenders are cut and everything else, so what's the matter? But let me get that modified real quick, and then we'll finish putting this thing back together, hopefully. Okay, you can see here I had to cut that out to fit the neck, but now it's in there just like we want it. So now we're going to go ahead and screw all this back down, put all of the stuff back where it goes. So let me get started on that. So that's all back installed, everything's bolted down. So now we can get our electric fan bolted back in, and then we'll have to get our overflow bottle and hose back on, because the hose has the clamps for the fan shroud to go back on. So we're getting close. We are getting close, so I'll be right back. Okay, now it's time to get the fan and the radiator shroud put back in, and you'll notice that these have these tabs on the bottom, and they fit into these corresponding slots on the radiator down here. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. Right down here. And then put the two bolts back in the top. So let's see if we can wrestle this wire back down in here. Everything's back in now, and I'm going to grab some pliers and put this clamp back on, and then we will throw some zip ties on that wire going across there and get ready to fill it back up with antifreeze. So let me get those zip ties thrown on there and get all the tools out of the way, and we'll get ready to fill this thing up and bleed the system of air and call it a day. So I'll be right back. Alright, we got everything cleaned up, all the tools put away. So now we are getting ready to fill this thing up with some antifreeze. So I have this funnel. I've had it for a while, and it comes with a bunch of different adapters that fit into the radiator. and that's good to help try to get the bubbles out of the system, along with the jack under the corner here. So once I get this thing about full, well, as much as it'll take without starting it up, we'll go ahead and jack up that corner and crank it up. And we've got to fill this overflow container too. So let me grab the other funnel. Guess I should have had this over here already. Alright. So right off the bat, I'm going to take the 50-50 mix and fill up that overflow tank. And this is that kind of orangish yellowish stuff here, or not orange, greenish yellow. But what I want to do is fill this thing up and I'll go ahead and go just a hair over. In case we do end up with air bubbles. Theoretically, as it heats up, it will push fluid and air through this hose into the tank, and then as it cools back down, it'll suck it back. But you know, we'll see. It doesn't always work out that way. Oh. Now, since before I started, I went ahead and flushed the whole system out, motor, heater core, and radiator, before I pulled the radiator. So there's nothing in the system right now but water. And because we took the bottom radiator hose off, most of the water's out. But even with that, you got the heater core, you got the motor, you're still going to have around a half a gallon of water in there after you flush. So what I usually will start with is half a gallon of concentrate right off the bat. Just for the water that's already left behind in the system. Now, if you change your radiator out and you don't flush the system for some reason, and there's antifreeze left in it, then you can go ahead and just use the 50-50 mix at this point. Alright, so that's about a half a gallon right there. Concentrate, and then we'll just fill the rest of it up with the 50-50. Now I know I could mix this stuff with myself and save $1 or $2, but I don't feel like going to the store and buying distilled water. And luckily the water that I have here is not super hard. There's not a lot of mineral content in it, so it's pretty close to distilled water. So when I flush a radiator and motor out, I don't worry too much about that water that's still in there. You got some people that get really worried about using distilled water, and I can understand that, because you got some places where the water's, you're gonna get calcium deposits and everything else inside your motor, and you don't want that, because that's gonna reduce your cooling efficiency. So I try not to fill this funnel too awful high because as the bubbles come up out of it, it tends to splash everywhere. So you can see the bubbles are starting to slow down, so it's starting to get pretty filled up. Squeeze this hose a little bit. All right, so now that it's quit taking any, we can go ahead and crank it up and let it warm up. Now on these Cherokees, it'll tell you to turn the heater on, but you don't really have to worry about that because there's no water valve on these. The heater's got water going through it all the time. It does the selection through a flap in there, so turning the heater on or off is not really going to make any difference for you. You can do it. Now, I don't know if I'm talking about this right here, 1998 model. You know, if you got like a 1989, I don't know. So let's crank it up and see what we're dealing with. You can see it's still drinking it on down, and you want to check around, make sure you don't have any leaks. You shouldn't, but you just never know, so it's always a good idea to check. So this thing will continue to bubble up. We'll let it idle until the thermostat opens. And then once we get to a point where it's not taking any more water, we'll stick the plug down in there, pull this off, put our cap back on real quick, and we should be done. I'm fixing to raise this corner up just to give it that much more of a chance of getting all the bubbles out. But that's basically how it's done. So I will update you after a couple of weeks and let you know what I think of this radiator. It's not sponsored, but you know, if you're gonna buy one, you might as well know something about it before you do. So let me put this down so I can do what I got to do here, and we will see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel. Y'all have a good one.